the year 751 AD, on the banks of the Talas River in Central Asia, two great armies collided. On one side stood the Tang dynasty of China, one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. On the other stood the Abbasid Caliphate, the rising Islamic power of the Middle East. This battle was not fought over religion, nor over territory. It was fought over control of trade. When the fighting ended, Chinese papermakers were taken captive, and one of the most important technologies in human history began its journey westward. That single moment would help ignite the Islamic Golden Age, fuel the European Renaissance, and quietly reshape the world. This is the story of the Silk Road. Long before it ever had a name, humans were trading across vast distances. As early as 2000 BCE, jade from Central Asia reached Neolithic China, while lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan appeared in the tombs of Mesopotamia and Egypt. These early exchanges were small and fragmented, limited by geography and political boundaries. There was no unified system, no grand route binding civilizations together. By the 2nd century BCE, China was unified under the Han Dynasty. It was a powerful empire, technologically advanced and culturally confident, but threatened along its northern borders by nomadic confederations known as the Xiongnu. In 138 BCE, Emperor Wu of Han sent an imperial envoy named Zhang Qian westward to seek allies against these nomads. Zhang Qian was captured and held for years, but eventually escaped and continued his journey through Central Asia. When he finally returned to China, he brought no alliance, but something far more valuable: knowledge. He reported advanced kingdoms, powerful horses in the Fergana Valley, and established trade routes reaching far beyond China's borders. His journey revealed that China was not isolated, but part of a much larger world. From this moment, long-distance trade began to expand. Silk, already prized within China, became the empire's most valuable export. It was lightweight, durable, luxurious, and rare beyond China's borders. The Chinese guarded the secret of silk production with extreme severity. Revealing the process of sericulture was punishable by death. Yet silk moved westward one caravan at a time. For centuries, silk was produced only in China. Its origins were humble, beginning with silkworms feeding on mulberry leaves, a process carefully observed and controlled by Chinese farmers. Inside workshops during the Han Dynasty, artisans developed a method that no other civilization could replicate. Silkworm cocoons were softened in hot water, their delicate threads unwound by hand and woven into fabric of remarkable smoothness and strength. The result was unlike anything the ancient world had seen. Lightweight, brilliant in color, and difficult to produce, silk quickly became one of China's most valuable resources. It was not treated as ordinary cloth. Silk was stored in government warehouses, inspected by officials, and used to pay soldiers, reward allies, and conduct diplomacy. In many cases, silk functioned as a form of currency. As demand grew beyond China's borders, merchants began preparing caravans for long journeys westward. Bundles of silk were loaded onto pack animals and carried across deserts and mountain passes. At each trading post, silk changed hands, passing from one merchant to another. Step by step, it moved farther from its place of origin, beginning a journey that would eventually connect China to distant civilizations. This was the birth of the silk trade, not a single road, but a growing network of exchange that would reshape the ancient world. By the 1st century BCE, silk had reached the Roman Empire. Roman elites were captivated by it. Writers like Pliny the Elder complained that Rome's gold was flowing east in exchange for fine cloth worn by women and men alike. Many Romans believed silk came from trees, not worms, but ignorance did nothing to slow demand. Trade intensified, linking the Mediterranean world to East Asia through a chain of intermediaries. Despite the name, the Silk Road was never a single road. It was a vast network of routes stretching over 6,000 kilometers. Caravans crossed deserts like the Taklamakan, navigated mountain ranges such as the Pamirs and Hindu Kush, and passed through fertile river valleys and open steppelands. Cities emerged as vital hubs along the way: Chang'an in China, Samarkand and Bokhara in Central Asia, Baghdad in the Middle East, and Constantinople at the edge of Europe. Merchants rarely traveled the entire distance. Goods changed hands many times, moving gradually from one end of the world to the other. At the heart of the Silk Road stood cities like Samarkand and Bokhara, where trade did not merely pass through. It gathered, mixed, and transformed. These markets were among the most cosmopolitan places on earth. Here, Chinese silk merchants stood beside Persian traders, Arab scholars, and Central Asian caravan leaders, all speaking different languages, yet sharing a common purpose. Silk, spices, gold, ceramics, and glassware changed hands daily, but commerce was only part of the exchange. Ideas traveled just as freely. Merchants shared news from distant empires. Scholars debated astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Religious beliefs moved quietly through conversation, not conquest. These markets operated on trust built over generations. Weights and measures were carefully observed. Caravan schedules followed the seasons. Knowledge of routes, climates, and politics determined success or ruin. In a world without instant communication, these cities became living networks, places where the East and West met face to face. The Silk Road was not defined by distance, but by these human connections, forged daily in the crowded markets of Central Asia. As night fell along the Silk Road, the caravanserai became more than shelter. It became a meeting place of worlds. Within these stone walls, travelers from distant lands rested side by side. Buddhist monks from India and Central Asia, Muslim traders from Persia and Arabia, Christian pilgrims moving between the Mediterranean and the East. They spoke different languages. They prayed in different ways. Yet here, distance and doctrine softened. The Silk Road did not force ideas to collide. It allowed them to sit together quietly. By firelight, bread was shared. Water was passed from hand to hand. Prayer beads rested beside trade goods. There were no debates, no sermons, no conversions demanded. Only the slow recognition of another human presence across belief and culture. When morning came, the travelers would rise, gather their goods, and continue on separate paths. But something traveled with them. A memory of coexistence, carried quietly across deserts and mountains, from one civilization to the next. Along the Silk Road, travelers did not only carry goods. They carried ideas, beliefs, and ways of seeing the world. One of the most powerful of these ideas was Buddhism, which spread from India into Central Asia and China through monasteries carved into stone. Nowhere is this more visible than in the cave temples of Dunhuang, carved along the edge of the desert. These caves were not only places of worship, but centers of learning, art, and preservation. Monks painted stories of the Buddha onto sandstone walls, using mineral pigments that have survived for centuries. Every figure, every gesture, and every color carried meaning, designed to teach, guide, and inspire. For weary travelers, these caves offered rest, reflection, and a reminder that the Silk Road was as much spiritual as it was commercial. Merchants, monks, and pilgrims passed through these chambers, leaving behind prayers, donations, and traces of distant worlds. Here, carved into stone and lit by fire, the ideas of one civilization quietly traveled thousands of miles and endured long after the caravans were gone. In the mid-8th century, the Silk Road became more than a channel of trade. To the east stood the Tang dynasty of China, whose influence had stretched deep into Central Asia. To the west stood the Abbasid Caliphate, a rapidly expanding Islamic empire determined to control the flow of commerce across Eurasia. In the year 751, these forces met in open conflict along the banks of the Talas River. When the fighting ended, the Tang forces withdrew eastward, and Chinese expansion into Central Asia came to a halt. But the most enduring consequence of the battle did not lie in victory or defeat. Among those taken captive were Chinese artisans skilled in the manufacture of paper. Until this moment, the knowledge of papermaking had been closely guarded in China for centuries. Now, that knowledge crossed cultural and political boundaries. In cities such as Samarkand, Chinese techniques were adopted, refined, and expanded. Paper began to replace parchment and papyrus, allowing books to be produced in greater numbers. From a single battle emerged a quiet revolution, one whose impact would echo for centuries. By the 8th century, Baghdad had become one of the most important cities in the world, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. At its heart stood the House of Wisdom, a center where scholars gathered to study, teach, and preserve knowledge. Texts from Greece, Persia, India, and Rome were translated into Arabic, ensuring that ancient learning was not lost. Paper made books cheaper and more abundant, allowing ideas to circulate far beyond royal courts. During this period, scholars advanced astronomy, medicine, and natural science through observation and experimentation. Algebra, geometry, and detailed maps were developed, laying foundations still used in the modern world. Through trade routes like the Silk Road, books and scholars carried this knowledge across continents. Libraries flourished from Cairo to Damascus to Cordoba, linking Africa, Asia, and Europe through learning. The Islamic Golden Age did not simply preserve knowledge. It expanded it, shaping the course of global history. From the vast grasslands of Central Asia emerged one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. The Mongols were masters of the steppe, organized, mobile, and unmatched in their use of cavalry. Under leaders such as Genghis Khan, their conquests united much of Eurasia under a single authority. For the first time in centuries, the Silk Road passed largely through lands governed by one empire. This period became known as the Pax Mongolica, an era in which trade flourished under enforced stability. Mongol relay systems allowed messages, goods, and travelers to move faster and more safely than ever before. Merchants, diplomats, and explorers from Europe and Asia crossed borders that had once been dangerous or closed. Along with silk and spices, ideas, technologies, and knowledge moved freely across continents. The Mongol Empire ruled through force, but its greatest legacy was the world it connected. By the late 13th century, the Silk Road had brought a European traveler into the heart of the Mongol Empire. His name was Marco Polo, a merchant from Venice, arriving at the court of the most powerful ruler in Asia. For the first time, Marco Polo stood face to face with a civilization unlike anything Europe had ever known. Presiding over this vast empire was Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and ruler of China under the Yuan dynasty. Surrounding him were Mongol nobles, administrators, and officials who governed lands stretching across continents. In this room, two worlds observed one another, separated by culture, language, and history. Silk, power, and ceremony filled the court, symbols of an empire built on conquest and trade. Marco Polo was only one man, standing inside the machinery of the largest land empire the world had ever seen. Yet this meeting would shape how Europe came to understand Asia for generations to come. By the mid-14th century, the Silk Road connected not only goods and ideas, but unseen dangers. Caravans moved from Asia into crowded cities, unknowingly carrying disease along the same routes as trade. At first, daily life continued, though fear and uncertainty quietly spread among the population. As the illness took hold, communities were overwhelmed, lacking knowledge, medicine, or protection. In desperation, cities sealed their gates, hoping isolation could stop what they did not understand. Markets emptied, streets fell silent, and entire neighborhoods were left abandoned. Death became a daily presence, as families buried loved ones in quiet, unending processions. Following trade routes across continents, the plague moved relentlessly from east to west. By 1350, the Black Death had killed millions, leaving the Silk Road forever changed. By the 15th century, the Silk Road no longer thrived as it once had. The great routes that carried wealth and ideas for centuries began to fall silent. Political instability fractured Central Asia, and long-distance caravan trade became increasingly dangerous and unreliable. Caravanserais that once echoed with voices, prayers, and bargaining slowly emptied, left behind as travelers disappeared. Cities that had grown rich from trade declined, their walls crumbling as commerce moved elsewhere. Fewer merchants risked the journey, the caravans grew smaller, and the long roads felt increasingly empty. The connections that once bound continents together began to fade, leaving only traces in the sand. Nature slowly reclaimed the routes, burying stones and pathways that had guided travelers for generations. As centuries passed, the world's focus shifted away from land routes toward the open seas. The Silk Road did not vanish suddenly, but it quietly slipped into history, its legacy carried forward in a changing world. For centuries, caravans crossed deserts and mountains, carrying the wealth of continents on their backs. But by the 15th century, a new force began to rise along the world's coastlines. Trade slowly shifted from land routes shaped by camels to seas ruled by wind and wood. Sails replaced caravans, and the wind became the engine of global commerce. Ocean routes were faster, cheaper, and safer than the long roads of Central Asia. The Great Silk Road did not vanish overnight, but it slowly fell silent. In its place rose a new world, connected not by deserts, but by the open sea. Across deserts and mountains, caravans once moved slowly, linking distant worlds long before borders existed. Silk, spices, and gold passed from hand to hand, binding strangers through trust, exchange, and necessity. Along these same roads traveled monks, scholars, and pilgrims, carrying beliefs that would shape civilizations. From fragile parchment to bound books, knowledge multiplied, preserved, and shared across continents. The ancient roads did not disappear. They transformed, becoming the foundations of a connected world. Today's cities pulse with movement and light, echoes of trade routes first carved into sand and stone. The Silk Road still lives, not as a road, but as the blueprint of global connection. Thank you for watching and for supporting this journey through history. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like and subscribe for more videos like this, and stay tuned as we uncover more untold stories of our shared human past.